Chapter 1. An unusual telegram. It was during the particularly dismal November of 1887 that my dear friend Sherlock Holmes found himself entangled in what would later become known in my private records as the affair of the Opaline Mask. The London fog had settled with unusual persistence that autumn, shrouding the city in a perpetual twilight that seemed to invite the most peculiar of mysteries to our doorstep at 231B Baker Street. I had recently returned from my club on that particular evening to find Holmes in one of his characteristic poses, stretched, out in his favorite armchair, his angular form nearly disappearing into the shadows save for the occasional glint of his pipe as he drew upon it thoughtfully. The room was thick with tobacco smoke, a sure sign that my friend had been deep in contemplation for some hours. "Ah, Watson," he remarked without turning, those keen eyes still fixed upon some invisible point in the distance. "I was wondering when you might return. You'll be interested to know that we have received a most unusual telegram." I removed my damp coat and took my customary seat opposite him. "Indeed? From whom?" "From Sir Frederick Ashton of Thornfield Hall in Surrey." Holmes reached lazily to the side table and procured a yellow telegram form, which he extended toward me. "Read it, if you would." The message was brief, but undeniably intriguing. "Require immediate assistance. Stop priceless artifact. Stolen under impossible circumstances. Stop family reputation at stake. Stop unusual death may be connected. Stop discretion. Essential stop will provide carriage from Waterloo. 10 a.m. tomorrow stop Ashton." "Impossible circumstances?" I queried, handing the telegram back to Holmes. "That ought to pique your interest." A thin smile played across Holmes's austere features. "It already has, Watson. Sir Frederick is not given to exaggeration or flights of fancy. He is a respected antiquarian and museum benefactor with connections throughout the highest levels of society. If he says the circumstances are impossible, I am inclined to believe there is something genuinely unusual afoot." "And what of this unusual death?" I asked, my medical curiosity naturally aroused. "That, my dear Watson, is precisely what renders this case worthy of our attention," Holmes replied, finally sitting upright and fixing me with that penetrating gaze that signaled his intellect was fully engaged. "Sir Frederick has deliberately withheld details even in a private telegram. That suggests either fear of interception or concern that the bare facts would strain credibility." Holmes rose suddenly, crossing to the window where he parted the curtains to peer down at Baker Street below, now little more than a ribbon of gaslights cutting through the fog. "You will, of course, accompany me to Surrey tomorrow?" he asked, though it was scarcely a question. "Naturally," I replied, already feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation that heralded the beginning of one of Holmes's cases. "Though I must say, you seem uncommonly interested before we've heard any of the details." Holmes turned from the window, and I was struck by the intensity in his gaze. "Three factors recommend this case, Watson. First, Sir Frederick's reputation as a level-headed man of science. Second, the connection between theft and death, which suggests a complexity beyond ordinary crime. And third—" He paused, returning to his chair and reaching for his pipe. "And third?" I prompted. "The mention of the artifact itself," Holmes said, relighting his pipe with deliberate care. "I have long had an interest in rare antiquities, particularly those with, shall we say, controversial histories." "You know what was stolen, then?" I asked, surprised. "I have my suspicions," Holmes replied cryptically. "Sir Frederick has one of the finest private collections of Byzantine artifacts in England. But there is one piece in particular that has always been surrounded by unusual tales, the Opaline Mask of Empress Theodora. I don't believe I'm familiar with it," I admitted. Holmes leaned back, sending a perfect ring of smoke toward the ceiling. "Few are, Watson. It is said to be crafted from a single piece of opal of impossible size and clarity, dating from the 6th century. Its provenance is disputed, its very existence questioned by many scholars. If it is genuine, however, its value would be incalculable, not merely in monetary terms but historically. And you believe this is what was stolen? It would explain the urgency and secrecy. Holmes nodded. The mask has a peculiar history, some would say a cursed one. Several deaths have been associated with its previous owners. I could not help but chuckle. Surely you don't put stock in such superstitions, Holmes? Not in the least, he replied firmly. But others do, which makes such beliefs relevant to our investigation. Someone may have stolen the mask precisely because of its reputed powers, or used those superstitions to disguise a more mundane motive. Holmes rose again, this time with purpose, and crossed to his desk, where he began rifling through a stack of newspaper clippings. Here, he said after a moment, extracting a small article. 3 weeks ago, Sir Frederick returned from Constantinople, with what was described as significant additions to his already noteworthy collection. No specific mention of the mask, but the timing is suggestive. I was impressed, as always, by Holmes' habit of collecting seemingly inconsequential news items that so often proved valuable later. We should prepare for an early departure, Holmes said, suddenly businesslike. The weather in Surrey has been particularly inclement this season, so dress accordingly. And Watson, he added, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light I had come to recognize as the harbinger of an exceptional case. Bring your service revolver. You anticipate danger, then? I asked, immediately alert. I anticipate the unexpected, Holmes corrected. And in my experience, the unexpected frequently brings danger in its wake. With that enigmatic statement, Holmes took up his violin, a sure sign that his active mind required the solace of music to process the limited facts at our disposal. As the haunting strains of Mendelssohn filled our lodgings, I found myself contemplating the strange case that lay before us. Little did I know then how the affair of the Opaline Mask would test even Sherlock Holmes's remarkable faculties, or how close we would both come to meeting our end in the pursuit of the truth, behind the impossible theft and the death that accompanied it. Chapter 2. Journey to Thornfield Hall. The following morning greeted London with a particularly stubborn fog that clung to the city like a shroud. Holmes and I departed Baker Street promptly at 9, arriving at Waterloo Station with time to spare, before our appointment with Sir Frederick's carriage. As we waited on the platform, I observed Holmes scanning our surroundings with that characteristic intensity that suggested his mind was already working on the case. His collar was turned up against the chill, his hawk-like profile occasionally illuminated by the glow of his pipe. "You seem preoccupied, Holmes," I remarked. "I am considering possibilities, Watson," he replied quietly. "It is never wise to theorize before one has data, yet I find myself unusually intrigued by what little we know. An impossible theft, an unusual death, both connected to an artifact of dubious provenance. It promises to be a singular case." Our conversation was interrupted by the approach of a well-dressed gentleman who identified himself as Baxter, Sir Frederick's personal secretary. He was a thin, nervous man with spectacles and meticulously groomed hair that belied the anxiety evident in his manner. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us with a slight bow. "Sir Frederick sends his apologies for not meeting you personally. Events at Thornfield have become rather complicated since the telegram was sent." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Complicated in what way, Mr. Baxter?" "I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss details here," Baxter replied, glancing nervously at the crowded platform. "Sir Frederick was most insistent that all particulars be conveyed in private. The carriage awaits outside." The journey to Surrey passed largely in silence, with Baxter deflecting Holmes' occasional questions with polite but firm reminders of his instructions. I could tell by the subtle tightening around Holmes's eyes that he found this reticence both frustrating and intriguing. The fog thinned somewhat as we left London behind, revealing the rolling countryside of Surrey draped in the muted colors of late autumn. After approximately 2 hours, we turned onto a long, tree-lined drive that curved gracefully toward an impressive manor house of Elizabethan design. "Thornfield Hall," Baxter announced unnecessarily as the carriage rolled to a stop. Before the main entrance, the house stood 3 stories tall, its facade a harmonious blend of red brick and ornate stonework. Ivy climbed much of the exterior, its dark leaves providing a stark contrast to the pale stone. Despite its undeniable grandeur, I detected a certain foreboding in its aspect, a sentiment apparently shared by Holmes, who studied the building with narrow-eyed assessment. "Quite the ancestral pile," he murmured to me as we alighted from the carriage, "though I note the east wing appears significantly newer than the rest, likely added during the previous century." Before I could respond, the heavy oak door swung open to reveal a distinguished gentleman in his early 60s. Sir Frederick Ashton was tall and straight-backed, despite his years, with a full head of silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His countenance, however, bore the unmistakable signs of recent strain, deep lines around his eyes and a certain pallor to his complexion. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us, his voice cultured but weary. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please follow me to my study where we can speak privately." We were led through a grand entrance hall adorned with archaeological artifacts from various cultures: Roman busts, Egyptian statuary, and Byzantine mosaics. Holmes's gaze lingered on each piece momentarily, but he maintained a respectful silence. As we followed Sir Frederick to a well-appointed study at the rear of the house, "I must apologize for the secrecy," Sir Frederick began once the door was closed, and we were seated in comfortable leather chairs before a crackling fire. "But this matter requires the utmost discretion. My family's reputation, indeed, perhaps, my very freedom, may depend upon it." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Perhaps you should begin at the beginning, Sir Frederick. Tell us exactly what was stolen, and under what circumstances." Sir Frederick poured 3 glasses of brandy from a crystal decanter, handing one to each of us before taking his seat behind a massive mahogany desk. "2 nights ago," he began, "a priceless artifact was taken from my private collection room, a room that was locked and sealed, with only myself possessing a key. The artifact in question was the Opaline Mask of Empress Theodora." Holmes nodded, almost imperceptibly, confirming his earlier suspicion. "What makes this theft truly baffling," Sir Frederick continued, "is that the room remained locked from the inside. The windows were barred and undisturbed. There was no sign of forced entry whatsoever. It is as if the mask simply vanished." "And the unusual death you mentioned?" Holmes prompted. Sir Frederick's hand trembled slightly as he raised his glass. "That is the most disturbing aspect. My curator, Mr. Edmund Blake, was found dead in the collection room yesterday morning. The door had to be broken down, as it was still locked from within." "The cause of death?" I inquired, my medical instincts engaged. "That's what the local police cannot determine, Dr. Watson. There are no wounds, no signs of violence, no evidence of poison. Blake was simply dead. His face—" Sir Frederick paused, visibly disturbed by the recollection. "His face was contorted in what appeared to be extreme terror." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "When did you last see the mask in its place?" 2 evenings ago at approximately 8 o'clock. I personally locked the collection room after showing the new acquisitions to a small party of guests." "And who comprised this party?" Holmes asked. "My ward, Miss Sophia Winters, my neighbor and friend Lord Harrington, Professor James Morley from the British Museum, and Dr. Calvin Reed, an American collector with an interest in Byzantine artifacts." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the American. "And they all witnessed the mask at that time?" "Yes, it was the centerpiece of my latest acquisitions. We all admired it, though none touched it save myself, to place it in its display case." "And Blake's body was discovered?" By my housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, at approximately 7 yesterday morning. She had gone to clean the collection room, as was her usual routine, and found the door locked. When her knocking went unanswered, she grew concerned and summoned the butler, who then came to me. We forced the door and found poor Blake on the floor, directly before the empty display case. Holmes rose abruptly, pacing the length of the study. I should like to examine the collection room immediately, Sir Frederick, and afterward I would appreciate interviews with each of your guests, as well as your household staff. Sir Frederick nodded gravely. Of course, Mr. Holmes, though I must emphasize, I vouch personally for every person under my roof. They are all above suspicion. Holmes paused by the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens now shrouded in the gathering dusk. In my experience, Sir Frederick, he said quietly, when faced with an impossible crime, one must question everything, and everyone. He turned back to face our host. Now, shall we proceed to the scene of these extraordinary events? Chapter 3. The sealed chamber, Sir Frederick led us through a series of corridors adorned with artifacts from his extensive collection. We passed display cases containing everything from Roman coins to Egyptian scarabs, each meticulously labeled and arranged. Eventually, we arrived at a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. 2 constables from the local police stood guard outside. The collection room remains as it was found, Sir Frederick explained. Inspector Warren of the local constabulary agreed to leave everything undisturbed upon learning of your imminent arrival. Holmes nodded approvingly. Most accommodating of him. A solidly built man with a reddish mustache approached from the end of the corridor. Mr. Holmes, he said, extending his hand. Inspector Warren, I've heard much about your methods. I must admit, I'm at a loss with this one. Inspector, Holmes acknowledged with a brief handshake. I understand the body has been removed? Yes, sir, taken to the local mortician yesterday afternoon after the police surgeon examined it. No visible cause of death, as Sir Frederick likely told you. Most peculiar. And the room itself? Untouched since we broke in the door. That's the replacement. Warren indicated the new door that had been fitted. The original was damaged beyond repair when we forced entry. Holmes turned to Sir Frederick. The key, if you please. Sir Frederick produced an ornate iron key from his waistcoat pocket. Holmes examined it carefully before unlocking the door. The collection room was spacious and octagonal, with a high domed ceiling painted with astronomical symbols. Display cases lined the walls, while freestanding pedestals occupied the center space. Large windows of leaded glass punctuated 4 of the 8 walls, each fitted with decorative but sturdy iron bars on both the inside and outside. Holmes immediately began a methodical examination of the room, moving with the precision of a bloodhound. He examined the windows first, testing each bar, then turning his attention to the marble floor, where I could still discern the faint outline where Blake's body had lain. Tell me, Sir Frederick, Holmes asked without looking up from his inspection, who else possesses knowledge of your security arrangements? Only my most trusted staff. Baxter, my secretary, Phillips, my butler, and of course, poor Blake himself. And the display case that housed the mask. Which one was it? Sir Frederick indicated a central pedestal with a glass dome, now conspicuously empty. Holmes approached it carefully, removing his lens from his pocket to examine every inch of the case and pedestal. Most interesting, he murmured after several minutes. Watson, what do you make of these marks? I joined him at the pedestal and observed a series of faint, curved scratches on its marble surface. They appeared to be scratch marks of some kind, I ventured. Perhaps from a tool used to pry open the case? Perhaps, Holmes replied noncommittally. Sir Frederick, was this pedestal dedicated solely to the mask? Yes, it was designed specifically for it. The mask arrived only 3 weeks ago, and I had this pedestal prepared in advance. Holmes circled the pedestal slowly. And where exactly was Blake's body found in relation to this display? Warren stepped forward. "Right here, sir." He indicated a spot directly in front of the pedestal. Face up, arms at his sides, no signs of a struggle. Holmes knelt and examined the floor minutely, even going so far as to sniff it at one point, which drew a raised eyebrow from Inspector Warren. "A curious scent," Holmes remarked. "Somewhat like almonds, but with an unfamiliar undertone. Do you detect it, Watson?" I knelt beside him and indeed caught a faint, unusual odor. "Yes, though it's very slight. Could it be a poison?" "Possibly, though not one I'm familiar with." Holmes rose and addressed Sir Frederick. "I should like to know more about this mask. You mentioned it was of Byzantine origin?" Sir Frederick's eyes lit up with scholarly enthusiasm, momentarily displacing his anxiety. "Yes, purportedly created during the reign of Justinian I for his wife, Empress Theodora. It's carved from a single piece of opal, something many experts claimed was impossible given the size and quality. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, with gold filigree and small rubies accenting the opal. And its provenance? Somewhat disputed, Sir Frederick admitted. It disappeared during the Fourth Crusade when Constantinople was sacked, allegedly taken by a Venetian merchant. It resurfaced briefly in the 16th century in Florence, then vanished again until I traced it to a private collection in Istanbul. The legal status of its exportation? Holmes inquired delicately. Sir Frederick shifted uncomfortably. All necessary permissions were obtained, Mr. Holmes, though I will admit the Ottoman authorities were reluctant. There are certain superstitions attached to the mask. What sort of superstitions? I asked. Nonsense, really, Sir Frederick replied dismissively. Tales of misfortune befalling those who possess it. A curse, if you will. The previous owner was quite eager to be rid of it after his wife fell mysteriously ill. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Yet you were not deterred by these stories? I am a man of science, Mr. Holmes. I do not believe in curses. Nor do I, Holmes agreed. Yet beliefs, however irrational, can motivate actions. Someone may have stolen the mask precisely because of these superstitions. Holmes continued his inspection, paying particular attention to the windows and the newly replaced door. After some time, he stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, as if mentally reconstructing the scene. Sir Frederick, he said at last, I should like to speak with your staff members and guests individually. But first tell me, was Blake in the habit of working late in this room? Yes, frequently. He was cataloging the new acquisitions. I gave him permission to access the collection room as needed. One final question for now. This mask, what would be its market value approximately? Sir Frederick considered. To the right buyer? Perhaps $50,000, but it would be virtually impossible to sell openly. Its theft has already been reported to the major museums and collectors. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Then we must consider other motives besides simple theft for profit. He turned to me. Watson, I believe our work here has only just begun. We shall need to speak with everyone present in the house over the last 2 days, particularly those who viewed the mask prior to its disappearance. As we left the collection room, I noticed Holmes slip something small into his pocket, an action so subtle that neither Sir Frederick nor Inspector Warren appeared to notice. When I caught his eye, he gave me an almost imperceptible shake of the head, indicating that now was not the time for questions. Perhaps we might begin with the household staff, Holmes suggested, as Sir Frederick locked the door behind us. The smallest details can often prove most illuminating. Of course, Sir Frederick agreed. I've instructed everyone to make themselves available to you. Baxter can arrange the interviews in the library. As we followed our host down the corridor, Holmes leaned close to whisper in my ear. Observe everything, Watson, especially reactions. When the mask is mentioned, this case has depths we have yet to fathom. Chapter 4. The Household Staff. The library of Thornfield Hall was a magnificent chamber, 2 stories in height with a gallery running around the upper level. Massive bookshelves reached from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that represented centuries of collected knowledge. A large oak table dominated the center of the room, where Holmes arranged himself with a notebook at the ready. "I prefer to conduct these interviews privately," Holmes informed Sir Frederick. "People speak more freely when their employers are absent." Sir Frederick nodded, though the suggestion clearly made him uncomfortable. "As you wish, Mr. Holmes. I shall be in my study should you require me." After he departed, Baxter, the secretary, arranged for the staff to be brought in one by one. First to enter was Phillips, the butler, a tall, dignified man of about 60 with a rigid posture that suggested military service. "You served in the army, I believe?" Holmes inquired after the introductions. Phillips straightened imperceptibly. "Yes, sir. Royal Fusiliers. 15 years before entering service with Sir Frederick's father." "And how long have you been at Thornfield Hall?" 27 years this December, sir." Holmes nodded approvingly. "A substantial tenure. Tell me, what was your impression of Mr. Blake, the curator?" A fleeting expression, something between distaste and discomfort, crossed Phillips's otherwise impassive features. "Mr. Blake was a learned gentleman, sir. Very knowledgeable about antiquities." "But?" Holmes prompted. Phillips hesitated. "It is not my place to speak ill of the dead, sir. On the contrary, complete candor may help us determine who is responsible for Mr. Blake's death," Holmes countered. "Your impressions, however subjective, could be valuable." The butler considered this, then relented. "Mr. Blake was possessive of the collection, sir. Resented anyone else handling the artifacts, even Sir Frederick at times. And he had an unhealthy fascination with certain pieces, particularly those with, forgive me for saying so, unsavory histories." "Like the Opaline Mask?" I suggested. "Precisely, Dr. Watson. When that item arrived, Mr. Blake's behavior became increasingly peculiar. He spent long hours alone in the collection room, sometimes all night. I heard him talking to himself on several occasions." Holmes leaned forward. "What manner of speech? Coherent conversation or muttering?" "More like recitation, sir, in a language I didn't recognize. When I inquired, he claimed it was ancient Greek, related to his cataloging work." Holmes made a note. "Did you observe the mask yourself?" "Only briefly, sir. During the cleaning of the collection room the day before it disappeared." "And your impression?" Phillips shifted uncomfortably. "I found it disturbing, sir. Something about the eyes. They seemed to follow one around the room. Merely a trick of the light, I'm certain, but unsettling nonetheless." After dismissing Phillips, Holmes interviewed Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, a plump, matronly woman with keen eyes that suggested little escaped her notice. "You discovered Mr. Blake's body," Holmes began. "Yes, sir." "A dreadful shock it was," she replied, twisting her handkerchief. "I'd gone to clean the collection room, as I do every morning at 7. The door was locked, which was unusual, but not unheard of if Mr. Blake had worked late. When he didn't answer my knock, I fetched Mr. Phillips." "Had you noticed anything unusual about Mr. Blake's behavior in the days before his death?" Mrs. Collins hesitated. "He'd been looking ill, sir. Pale, with dark circles under his eyes. When I mentioned it, he said he hadn't been sleeping well, that he'd been having nightmares." "Did he elaborate on the nature of these nightmares?" Holmes inquired. "He said—" She lowered her voice. "He said he dreamed of a woman in a mask who tried to speak to him, but he couldn't understand her words. Said it felt like drowning when she came near." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "One last question, Mrs. Collins. Were you present when the mask was unwrapped upon its arrival?" "I was, sir. Sir Frederick insisted on doing it himself, but asked me to prepare the display case. Mr. Blake was quite put out that he wasn't allowed to handle it first." "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. That will be all for now." Next came a procession of other staff members: the cook, 2 footmen, a groundskeeper, and several maids. Each provided small details that, while seemingly insignificant individually, began to form a more complete picture when taken together. The groundskeeper mentioned seeing lights in the collection room window at 2 in the morning on the night of the theft. One of the maids reported hearing what sounded like singing coming from the same room well after midnight. The cook noted that Blake had barely touched his meals in the week before his death. As the afternoon progressed, Holmes's notebook filled with observations. I could tell by the intensity of his gaze that certain patterns were emerging, though he kept his thoughts to himself. Last among the staff was Baxter himself, the nervous secretary who had met us at the station. Unlike the others, he seemed genuinely distressed by Blake's death. "You were acquainted with Mr. Blake before his employment here?" Holmes asked. Baxter nodded. "We studied together at Cambridge. I recommended him to Sir Frederick when the previous curator retired." "Were you friends?" "Colleagues," Baxter corrected. "Blake was brilliant but difficult, competitive to a fault. We specialized in similar areas of study, though he far surpassed me in his knowledge of Byzantine artifacts." "Did he express any concerns to you about the mask?" Baxter hesitated, adjusting his spectacles. "He believed it was dangerous." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "In what sense?" "He claimed it had been used in ancient rituals, not merely decorative as Sir Frederick believed. He'd been researching its history extensively and had become convinced that the mask was somehow alive." "Alive?" I echoed incredulously. "His word, not mine," Baxter said quickly. "I attributed it to exhaustion. Blake had been working obsessively since the mask arrived." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "One final question, Mr. Baxter. Do you believe the mask is still in this house?" The question seemed to startle the secretary. I couldn't say. The police searched thoroughly." "That wasn't what I asked," Holmes pressed. "Based on your knowledge of this house and its occupants, what is your personal belief?" Baxter's eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on Holmes. "Yes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I believe it's still here." After Baxter departed, Holmes sat in silence for several minutes, reviewing his notes. "Well, Watson," he said at last, "what do you make of all this?" "Blake seems to have been unnaturally obsessed with the mask," I observed, "perhaps to the point of delusion. Could he have hidden it himself, then suffered some kind of attack, heart failure perhaps, brought on by his agitated mental state?" Holmes nodded. "A plausible theory. Yet it doesn't explain how the room remained locked from the inside, nor the peculiar odor we detected." He rose suddenly. "We should speak with Sir Frederick's guests before dinner. I'm particularly interested in this American collector, Dr. Reed. It seems rather convenient that an expert in Byzantine artifacts should be visiting at precisely the time of the theft." As we left the library, Holmes paused. "By the way, Watson, did you notice that every staff member, without exception, referred to the missing item as the mask, never the opal mask or the artifact, as if it were the only mask of significance?" "Perhaps that's simply how Sir Frederick refers to it," I suggested. "Perhaps," Holmes agreed, though his tone suggested he found the detail significant. "Or perhaps the Opaline Mask has established a presence in this household that transcends its physical description." Shatun, Chapter 5. The distinguished guests. Evening was settling over Thornfield Hall by the time Holmes and I made our way to the drawing room where Sir Frederick had assembled his guests. The grand chamber was illuminated by a magnificent crystal chandelier that cast a warm glow over the assembled company, who rose as we entered. "Allow me to make the introductions," Sir Frederick said. "My ward, Miss Sophia Winters." A young woman of perhaps 25 years curtsied gracefully. She possessed striking features, dark hair, pale complexion, and unusually vivid green eyes that regarded us with undisguised curiosity. I noted that she wore a pendant of opal that caught the light as she moved. Lord Edgar Harrington, my neighbor and friend, a robust gentleman with a florid face and silver whiskers, shook our hands vigorously. Heard all about you, Mr. Holmes. Remarkable business with the blue carbuncle. Remarkable. Professor James Morley from the British Museum. The professor was a thin, stooped man with a perpetually distracted air. His handshake was limp, his watery eyes magnified behind thick spectacles. An honor, gentlemen, he murmured. And finally, Dr. Calvin Reed from Boston. The American was younger than the others, perhaps 40, with a square jaw and penetrating blue eyes. His handshake was firm, his smile confident. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, your reputation precedes you even across the Atlantic. Now, said Sir Frederick, perhaps we might— Actually, Holmes interrupted politely, I would prefer to speak with each person individually, if you don't mind. After a momentary hesitation, Sir Frederick agreed, and a small antechamber adjacent to the drawing room was arranged for our use. Holmes requested that Miss Winters be the first interviewee. Once we were settled, Holmes regarded the young woman, with a pleasant smile that I knew belied his intense scrutiny. Miss Winters, how long have you been Sir Frederick's ward? 10 years, Mr. Holmes. My parents, close friends of Sir Frederick, died in a boating accident when I was 15. He has been most generous in taking me in. And your relationship with the late Mr. Blake? A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed her features. Mr. Blake was devoted to Sir Frederick's collection. Our interactions were limited to occasions when I expressed interest in certain artifacts. Did you express interest in the Opaline Mask? Naturally. It's a magnificent piece with a fascinating history. She touched the opal pendant at her throat, a gesture I suspected was unconscious. Byzantine artifacts have always intrigued me. Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Blake's behavior in the days leading up to his death? She considered this. He seemed agitated, more so than usual. He was always rather high-strung, but lately he'd become almost feverish in his enthusiasm for the mask. I overheard him arguing with Sir Frederick the day before the theft. Holmes's eyebrows rose slightly. About what, precisely? Blake wanted. To conduct some sort of test on the mask, something involving ultraviolet light, I believe. Sir Frederick refused, saying it might damage the opal. One final question, Miss Winters. Where were you on the night the mask disappeared? Her gaze was steady. In my room, reading. I retired early with a headache. Can anyone confirm this? My lady's maid brought me a hot compress at about 10. After that, I was alone. Holmes thanked her and requested that Lord Harrington be sent in next. The nobleman entered with the confident air of a man accustomed to deference. Nasty business, this, he declared without preamble. Poor Blake. And that magnificent mask, worth a small fortune, I understand. You have an interest in antiquities yourself, Lord Harrington? Holmes inquired. Dabble a bit. Nothing like Frederick's passion. My interests run more to horses and hunting, truth be told. Yet you attended the unveiling of the mask. Harrington waved a hand dismissively. Neighborly obligation. Frederick and I have adjoining estates. Been friends for 30 years. What was your impression of the mask? Extraordinary craftsmanship, certainly. Though between us, gentlemen, he leaned forward conspiratorially. I found it somewhat disturbing. Something about the expression, serene yet knowing, if that makes sense, gave me a chill, though I'd never admit it to Frederick. Did you observe Mr. Blake during the unveiling? Hard not to, Harrington snorted. Man was practically salivating, hovering over Frederick's shoulder, eager as a schoolboy. Most inappropriate for a man in his position. Next came Professor Morley, who settled into the chair with an air of academic detachment. The historical significance of the mask cannot be overstated, he informed us without prompting. If authentic, and I have some reservations about its provenance, it represents an unprecedented example of Byzantine craftsmanship. You doubt its authenticity? Holmes asked. Morley adjusted his spectacles. The size of the opal alone stretches credibility. No known deposits from the 6th century could have produced such a specimen. And the craftsmanship, he hesitated. It's too perfect. Byzantine artisans were skilled, certainly, but this piece exhibits techniques that seem anachronistic. Did you share these concerns with Sir Frederick? I attempted to, but he was rather unreceptive. He's invested considerable sums and reputation in this acquisition. Understandably, he prefers validation to skepticism. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. And Mr. Blake? Did he share your doubts? Quite the contrary. Blake was convinced not only of its authenticity, but of its supernatural properties. Morley's tone conveyed his disdain for such notions. Most unscientific. A disappointment coming from a scholar of his caliber. Last to be interviewed was Dr. Calvin Reed, the American collector. He entered with a relaxed confidence that contrasted sharply with the professor's nervous energy. Fascinating case, Mr. Holmes, he remarked, taking a seat. A locked room mystery worthy of Poe himself. You're familiar with Edgar Allan Poe's work? I asked, somewhat surprised. Reed smiled. We Americans do read, Dr. Watson. In fact, I find Poe's The Purloined Letter particularly instructive in cases like this. Sometimes what we seek is hidden in plain sight. Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. You specialize in Byzantine artifacts, I understand. Among other areas, yes. My collection focuses primarily on items with religious or ceremonial significance. Like the Opaline Mask? Reed nodded. Precisely. Though I must confess, when Sir Frederick acquired it, I experienced a mixture of admiration and envy. It's the centerpiece my collection lacks. Would you have purchased it, given the opportunity? In a heartbeat, Mr. Holmes. I offered Sir Frederick twice what he paid for it the very night it was unveiled. He declined, of course. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. That's quite a generous offer for an item you had only just seen. Reed's smile didn't waver. I've been tracking the mask for years, Mr. Holmes. Its appearance on the market was not entirely unexpected to those of us in certain collecting circles. And where were you on the night of the theft, Dr. Reed? In my room, corresponding. With colleagues in Boston. I retired around midnight. Can anyone verify this? I'm afraid not, though I believe one of the maids may have heard me typing well into the evening. After Reed departed, Holmes sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Well, Watson, he said finally, what are your impressions? Each seems to have their own connection to the mask, I observed. Miss Winters shares its material in her jewelry and has an interest in Byzantine history. Lord Harrington found it disturbing yet valuable. Professor Morley doubts its authenticity, and Dr. Reed openly admits he covets it for his collection. Holmes nodded. Yes, and each lacks a firm alibi for the night in question. He rose suddenly. I believe dinner will be served shortly. We should join the others and observe closely. People reveal much when they believe the formal questioning has ended. As we made our way back to the drawing room, Holmes added quietly, Pay particular attention to Dr. Reed, Watson. His reference to the purloined letter may be more than literary appreciation. He's suggesting the solution could be obvious, perhaps because he himself knows precisely where the mask is hidden. Chapter 6. Dinner and Disclosures. The dining room of Thornfield Hall was a testament to generations of wealth and refinement. A massive oak table gleamed beneath the light of 3 chandeliers, the walls adorned with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow our movements with aristocratic judgment. Silver candelabras cast dancing shadows across the damask tablecloth, creating an atmosphere both elegant and slightly unnerving. Sir Frederick sat at the head of the table with Holmes to his right and Professor Morley to his left. I found myself between Miss Winters and Dr. Reed, while Lord Harrington occupied the foot of the table opposite our host. Baxter, the secretary, completed our party, looking distinctly uncomfortable in such distinguished company. As the first course was served, a delicate consommé that steamed in the fine china bowls, polite conversation began to flow. I observed Holmes carefully maintaining his role as the interested guest, while subtly steering the conversation toward topics that might prove revealing. "I understand your collection is one of the finest private assemblages in England, Sir Frederick," Holmes remarked casually. "What first drew you to Byzantine artifacts in particular?" Sir Frederick, visibly pleased by the question, launched into a lengthy discourse on the merits of Byzantine craftsmanship. As he spoke, I noticed Dr. Reed watching, him with an intensity that seemed excessive for the topic at hand. "The Byzantines understood something that later artisans often missed," Sir Frederick concluded. "The fusion of the spiritual and material, the seen and unseen realms." "A poetic assessment," Professor Morley commented dryly, "though perhaps lacking in scholarly precision." A momentary tension descended upon the table before Miss Winters smoothly intervened. "Uncle Frederick speaks from passion rather than academic constraint, Professor. Surely there's room for both approaches." "Indeed," Dr. Reed agreed, his American accent standing out sharply among the English voices. "The most valuable insights often come from those willing to look beyond established academic boundaries. The mask itself defies conventional categorization, does it not?" "If it's genuine," Professor Morley muttered into his wineglass. "You still doubt its authenticity?" Lord Harrington asked with evident surprise. "Even after your examination?" "I was permitted only the most cursory inspection," the professor replied defensively. "Hardly sufficient for a definitive assessment." "Yet you were quick to offer an opinion to the British Museum," Sir Frederick said, a note of accusation in his voice. "My contacts there inform me you've already submitted a report questioning my acquisition," the professor flushed. "Merely preliminary observations. Professional due diligence," Holmes interjected smoothly. "Controversy often surrounds objects of great significance. I recall a similar debate regarding the Borgia emeralds at the Louvre. This deft change of direction allowed the conversation to resume its polite veneer, though I noted the lingering tension between Sir Frederick and the professor. As the main meal course was served, pheasant with an assortment of vegetables from the estate, Miss Winters turned to me. "Have you and Mr. Holmes made any progress with the investigation, Dr. Watson?" Before I could formulate a suitably non-committal response, Holmes answered for me. "We are assembling the pieces, Miss Winters, though I must say the circumstances of this theft are among the most peculiar I have encountered." "In what way?" Dr. Reed inquired, leaning forward with evident interest. "Consider the facts," Holmes replied. "A priceless artifact vanishes from a locked room. The curator is found dead without apparent cause. No conventional method of entry or exit was employed." He paused deliberately. "It suggests either extraordinary ingenuity or something else entirely." "Something else?" Lord Harrington echoed. "You're not suggesting supernatural agency, surely?" Holmes smiled enigmatically. "I suggest nothing, Lord Harrington. I merely observe that when conventional explanations fail, one must expand one's considerations." "The mask has a certain presence," Miss Winters said softly. "Even in its case, it seemed to command attention." "Nonsense," Professor Morley scoffed. "It's merely an artifact, albeit an unusual one." "Is it?" Dr. Reed challenged. "The historical record suggests otherwise. The mask was reportedly worn during certain Byzantine ceremonies relating to divination and communion with the deceased. Some accounts claim Empress Theodora herself used it to communicate with her departed sister." "Superstitious rubbish," the professor dismissed. "No reputable scholar would entertain such theories." As the debate intensified, I observed Holmes, watching each speaker with keen attention, particularly noting their hands and eyes as they grew more animated. Sir Frederick remained notably silent during this exchange, his gaze distant. Suddenly a commotion erupted from the corridor outside. Phillips burst into the dining room, his usual composure abandoned. "Sir Frederick, you must come at once. Our host rose immediately. "What is it, Phillips?" "It's Mrs. Collins, sir. She's been found unconscious in the collection room, the very same spot where Mr. Blake was discovered." The dinner party dissolved into chaos. Sir Frederick and Holmes rushed from the room, followed closely by myself and the others. We hurried through the corridors to the collection room, where we found the housekeeper lying motionless before the empty pedestal, her face bearing the same expression of terror that had been described on Blake's features. I knelt beside her immediately, checking her vital signs. "She's alive," I announced with relief. "But her pulse is erratic and her breathing shallow." As I began administering what aid I could, Holmes circled the room, his eyes darting from the pedestal to the windows to the ceiling. "The door," he said suddenly. "Was it locked again?" Phillips, who stood trembling in the doorway, shook his head. "No, sir, it was standing open. I came to see if Sir Frederick had left some papers here and found her thus." "When did you last see Mrs. Collins?" Holmes demanded. "At dinner service, Mr. Holmes. She was overseeing the kitchen staff." I looked up from my patient. "She appears to have suffered some form of shock. I recommend she be moved to her bed immediately, and a doctor summoned." As servants were called to assist with moving Mrs. Collins, Holmes drew me aside. "Observe the floor, Watson," he whispered, indicating a faint, glittering residue near where the housekeeper had lain. The same substance I detected earlier, but fresher, more abundant. I squinted at the nearly invisible particles. "What is it?" "I'm not certain," Holmes admitted, carefully collecting a sample into a small envelope from his pocket. "But I believe it may be the key to our mystery." As we stepped back to allow the servants to attend to Mrs. Collins, I noticed something extraordinary. A faint opalescent shimmer in the air near the empty pedestal, visible only from certain angles, like heat rising from a summer road. "Holmes," I began, but when I turned to point it out, the phenomenon had vanished. The guests had gathered at the doorway, their faces displaying various degrees of shock and fascination. Dr. Reed caught my eye, his expression unreadable. "History repeats itself," he murmured, just loudly enough for me to hear. "The mask claims another." As we withdrew from the collection room, Holmes paused to address Sir Frederick. "I believe it would be wise for everyone to remain within the house tonight. The case has taken a more urgent turn." Sir Frederick nodded gravely. "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Whatever you require." Walking back toward our quarters, Holmes maintained an unusually pensive silence. Only when we were alone did he speak. "Watson, we are dealing with something extraordinary here. A case where the obvious explanation seems impossible, yet the impossible explanation cannot be correct." "What do you mean?" His eyes gleamed in the gaslight. "Consider, what if the mask itself is both the motive for the crime and the means by which it was committed?" Chapter 7. Midnight Revelations. Sleep eluded me that night at Thornfield Hall. The events of the day, culminating in the discovery of Mrs. Collins in circumstances so eerily similar to Blake's death, had left me in a state of nervous anticipation. Holmes, however, displayed no such restlessness. He sat cross-legged on the floor of our shared sitting room, surrounded by small piles of notes and diagrams he had sketched throughout the day. The grandfather clock in the corner had just chimed midnight when Holmes suddenly sprang to his feet. "Watson," he said in a low, urgent voice, "I require your assistance with an experiment." I rose from my armchair where I had been pretending to read. "Of course, Holmes. What do you have in mind?" "We must revisit the collection room," he replied, already pulling on his jacket. "Bring your revolver." The hallways of Thornfield Hall were dimly lit by gas lamps turned low for the night, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. As we approached the collection room, Holmes produced the key that Sir Frederick had provided him. "I have been contemplating the physical properties of opal," Holmes remarked as he unlocked the door. "It's a fascinating mineral, essentially silica with water trapped within its structure. Some varieties exhibit fluorescence under ultraviolet light, like the test Blake wanted to perform," I recalled. "Precisely," Holmes pushed the door open, and we entered the now familiar octagonal room. Sir Frederick refused, fearing damage to the mask, but I wonder if Blake had discovered something about this particular specimen that troubled him. Holmes closed the door behind us and produced a small electric torch fitted with a peculiar purple filter. "A recent innovation," he explained. "It emits ultraviolet radiation similar to certain specialized lamps used in scientific laboratories." He swept the torch around the room, paying particular attention to the empty pedestal. To my astonishment, a pattern of glowing footprints became visible on the floor, footprints that led from the pedestal to the center of the room, then vanished. "Extraordinary," I breathed. "Indeed." Holmes knelt to examine the footprints more closely. "Observe the shape and size, Watson. These are not made by a man's boots." I joined him on the floor. "They appear to be a woman's, but smaller than average, and strangely proportioned." "Yes," Holmes agreed. "And note how they simply end here, in the middle of the floor." He swept the ultraviolet light over the rest of the room, revealing more of the glittering residue we had observed earlier, now glowing with an eerie blue-green luminescence. "What is that substance?" I asked. "I believe it to be crushed opal," Holmes replied. "Microscopic fragments that have detached from the mask itself." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you suggesting the mask somehow walks on its own?" "That's impossible, Holmes." "Of course it is," he agreed readily. "Yet these footprints exist, and they match neither Blake's boots nor Mrs. Collins' shoes." He rose and directed the light toward the ceiling. "Ah, just as I suspected." Above the pedestal, barely visible even with the ultraviolet illumination, was a thin line, a seam in the ornate plasterwork of the domed ceiling. "A concealed trap door?" I suggested. "Possibly," Holmes murmured, "though how it might be operated from this room I cannot yet determine." Our investigation was interrupted by a soft sound from the corridor, a footfall, quickly muffled. Holmes immediately extinguished his torch, plunging us into darkness. He placed a cautionary hand on my arm as we both listened intently. The door handle turned slowly, and a sliver of light appeared as the door opened just enough to admit a slender figure. In the ambient glow from the corridor, I recognized Miss Winters, dressed in a dark dressing gown, her opal pendant gleaming at her throat. She moved with surprising confidence in the darkened room, making her way directly to the pedestal. From her pocket, she withdrew what appeared to be a small notebook, which she placed on the marble surface. She then positioned herself before it, head bowed, and began to speak in a low voice, not in English, but in what I presume to be ancient Greek. Holmes gripped my arm, signaling me to remain still. We watched as Miss Winters continued her strange recitation for several minutes before falling silent. She then reached out to touch the pedestal with both hands, her fingers splayed across its surface. What happened next defies rational explanation. The air above the pedestal seemed to shimmer, much as I had observed earlier, but more pronounced. A faint, opalescent glow emanated from Miss Winters' pendant, growing steadily brighter until it illuminated her face with an unearthly light. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. Miss Winters swayed slightly, steadied herself against the pedestal, then retrieved her notebook and turned to leave. Holmes chose this moment to reveal our presence. "An interesting ritual, Miss Winters," he said calmly, striking a match to light. "The room's gas lamps!" The young woman gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I didn't realize anyone was here." "Evidently," Holmes replied. "Perhaps you would care to explain what you were doing just now?" Miss Winters hesitated, clutching her notebook protectively. "I was communing." "With the mask?" Holmes asked. She nodded slowly. "It speaks to those who know how to listen." "And does it speak in ancient Greek?" Holmes inquired, his tone deliberately light. "The same language Blake was heard reciting?" "The language of its creation," she confirmed, seeming to make a decision. Mr. Holmes, I've not been entirely forthcoming with you. My connection to the mask is personal." "I had deduced as much," Holmes said. "Your pendant is no ordinary opal, is it?" She touched the stone at her throat. "It's a fragment of the original mask, broken off during the sack of Constantinople. It's been passed down through my mother's family for generations." "Then you are not merely Sir Frederick's ward," I said, comprehension dawning. "I am his ward. In a legal sense," she clarified. "But my mother's ancestry traces back to Byzantium. When I learned Sir Frederick had acquired the mask, I arranged to be here, to be near it." "Did Blake know of your connection?" Holmes asked. "He discovered it," she admitted. "He found me here one night, much as you have. Instead of exposing me, he became fascinated. He wanted to learn the rituals, the words of power. I taught him what I knew, but he went too far." "How so?" Holmes pressed. Miss Winter's eyes filled with tears. "The mask is not merely an artifact, Mr. Holmes. It contains something, a presence." Blake attempted to communicate with it without proper preparation, without the protection of familial connection. "And you believe this presence is responsible for his death?" I asked incredulously. She met my gaze with surprising steadiness. "I believe the mask defended itself, yes." Holmes studied her carefully. "Miss Winters, where is the mask now?" "I don't know," she replied, and I was inclined to believe her. "It vanished after Blake's attempt. I've been trying to call it back through the ritual you witnessed." "And Mrs. Collins?" Holmes asked. "Did she also attempt to communicate with the mask?" "No," Miss Winters shook her head vehemently. "She must have witnessed something she shouldn't have. The mask protects its secrets." Holmes exchanged a glance with me that suggested he was evaluating the young woman's sanity, a concern I readily shared. Yet the footprints glowing on the floor and the shimmering air I had twice observed were not so easily dismissed. "Miss Winters," Holmes said finally, "I believe you should return to your room. We will continue this discussion in the morning, though I would ask that you leave your notebook with me." She clutched it tighter. "These are sacred writings, Mr. Holmes." "Which may help explain a man's death," Holmes countered. "I will treat them with appropriate respect." After a moment's hesitation, she surrendered the notebook and departed, leaving Holmes and me alone once more in the collection room. "Well, Watson," Holmes sighed, flipping through the pages of elaborate Greek text and diagrams, "it seems our case has taken a decidedly metaphysical turn." "Surely you don't believe in this supernatural nonsense?" I asked. "I believe in observable phenomena," Holmes replied carefully. "And I believe that Miss Winters, whatever her delusions, knows more about this affair than she has revealed." He closed the notebook and tucked it into his pocket. "Come, Watson, dawn approaches, and I require a few hours of reflection before our next move." As we left the collection room, I could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching our departure. Chapter 8. The Notebook's Secrets. Morning brought a somber atmosphere to Thornfield Hall. Word of Mrs. Collins' condition had spread among the household. She remained unconscious, though the local physician who had been summoned during the night could find no physiological cause for her state. Holmes and I breakfasted early in our rooms, allowing him to share his thoughts away from curious ears. "I've spent the early hours translating portions of Miss Winters' notebook," Holmes explained, the book open beside his plate. "My Greek is serviceable, though the dialect is archaic. The contents are remarkable." "In what way?" I inquired, buttering a piece of toast. "It describes the mask not as an artifact but as a vessel, a container for something the Byzantines called pneuma, or spirit." Holmes turned a page covered in intricate diagrams. "According to these writings, the mask was created to facilitate communication with the deceased. The opal's unique properties supposedly make it permeable to energies that exist beyond our perception." "Surely you don't give credence to such mysticism?" I asked, surprised at Holmes's serious tone. He smiled thinly. I seek explanation, Watson, not belief. Whether the mask possesses supernatural properties or not, people believe it does, which motivates action. He closed the notebook. More importantly, these pages contain practical information about the mask's construction. It was apparently created in two parts, an outer shell of opal and an inner layer of gold filigree inscribed with specific symbols. Like Miss Winter's pendant, I observed. Precisely, a fragment of the original. Holmes tapped the cover of the notebook thoughtfully. I've also found references to a specific chemical compound used in the rituals associated with the mask, essence, of bitter almonds mixed with certain rare minerals. The almond scent we detected in the collection room, I realized. Yes. According to these writings, the compound enhances the mask's abilities. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. Now, let us set aside the supernatural elements and consider what we know factually. We have a missing artifact of immense value, a dead curator, an unconscious housekeeper, a mysterious trap door in the ceiling, unusual footprints, and a chemical substance with an almond-like odor, and a young woman who claims ancestral connection to a supposedly magical mask, I added. Indeed. Holmes rose abruptly. I believe it's time we examined that trapdoor more thoroughly. But first, I have questions for Sir Frederick about the structural details of this house. We found our host in his study, looking haggard from the night's events. After expressing appropriate concern for Mrs. Collins' condition, Holmes deftly steered the conversation toward the architecture of Thornfield Hall. The collection room is part of the original Tudor structure, I believe? Holmes inquired casually. Sir Frederick nodded. Yes, though it has been extensively renovated over the centuries. It was originally a private chapel for the family. Interesting, Holmes mused. And the rooms above it? There's a small attic space, then the roof. The chapel originally had a much higher ceiling, but my grandfather installed a false ceiling to create storage space above. Is there access to this attic space? A narrow staircase in the east wing, Sir Frederick replied, looking puzzled. Why do you ask? Thoroughness, Holmes answered smoothly. In cases of seemingly impossible theft, one must consider every potential entry and exit point. After obtaining directions to the attic staircase, we excused ourselves. As we walked, through the corridor we encountered Dr. Reed emerging from the library. Gentlemen, he greeted us with his customary confidence, though I noted dark circles beneath his eyes. Any developments in your investigation? Several, Holmes replied noncommittally. I understand you're quite knowledgeable about Byzantine artifacts, Dr. Reed. Have you ever encountered references to masks used in communication with the dead? Reed's expression remained carefully neutral. Of course. Such practices were not uncommon in that era, though typically dismissed by modern scholars as superstition. And your personal assessment? Holmes pressed. I reserve judgment, Reed replied. History is full of phenomena that defied explanation in their time, only to be understood centuries later through advances in science. A diplomatic answer, Holmes observed. Tell me, are you familiar with the chemical properties of opal? A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed Reed's features. I have some knowledge. It's primarily silica with water content, quite fragile, sensitive to rapid temperature changes. Indeed, Holmes agreed. Well, we mustn't keep you from your morning routine. As Reed continued on his way, Holmes whispered, Did you notice, Watson? A slight residue of the same powder we found in the collection room, beneath his fingernails. We proceeded to the east wing and located the narrow staircase Sir Frederick had described. It led to a dusty, low-ceilinged attic that stretched over much of the original house. Holmes moved with purpose, counting his steps as we navigated around. Trunks and discarded furniture shrouded in dust covers. The collection room should be approximately here, he announced, stopping before an area where the floorboards appeared newer than their surroundings. Kneeling, Holmes examined the floor carefully, then gestured for me to join him. "Observe, Watson. These boards have been cut and reassembled. A concealed hatch, expertly crafted." He traced the nearly invisible seam with his finger, then pressed experimentally at various points until a soft click was heard. A section of flooring, perhaps 3 feet square, loosened slightly. "Ah," Holmes said with satisfaction. "Clever craftsmanship. The mechanism releases with specific pressure applied at the correct point." He lifted the hatch to reveal the ornate plasterwork of the collection room's ceiling below, including the circular seam we had observed the previous night. "A secret passage into the collection room," I marveled. "But how could someone lower themselves through without being seen?" "That," Holmes replied, "is where our mysterious chemical compound may have played a role." He pointed to dark stains on the underside of the hatch. This substance was likely used to render someone temporarily unconscious, or in Mrs. Collins' case, cataleptic. "You believe someone drugged Blake, stole the mask, and escaped through this trapdoor?" I suggested. "It's a possibility," Holmes acknowledged, "though it doesn't explain the footprints or Miss Winter's involvement." He lowered the hatch and rose. "We should continue our exploration." At the far end of the attic, partially concealed, behind a large wardrobe, we discovered a small door that opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Servants' passage," Holmes explained. "Common in houses of this era, it would allow someone to move between floors unseen." We followed the stairs down, emerging through a disguised panel in the wainscoting of a dimly lit corridor that I recognized as being near our guest quarters. "So," I summarized, "someone could move from the guest wing to the attic, enter the collection room through the trapdoor, and return the same way without using the main corridors." "Precisely," Holmes nodded. "Though the question remains, who?" As we returned to the main part of the house, a commotion drew our attention to the entrance hall. Inspector Warren had arrived with 2 constables, and they were speaking urgently with Sir Frederick. "What's happening?" I asked as we approached. Sir Frederick turned to us, his face grave. "Professor Morley is missing from his room, and there's blood on his bedsheets." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "When was he last seen?" "At breakfast, sir," Phillips answered from behind Sir Frederick. "He complained of a headache and returned to his room around 9 o'clock. "And it's now nearly 11, Holmes murmured. "Inspector, I suggest we organize a thorough search of the grounds immediately. Watson and I have just discovered secret passages within the house that may be relevant to both the professor's disappearance and our original investigation." As the search party was being organized, Holmes drew me aside. "The case accelerates, Watson. We must find Professor Morley before he shares Blake's fate, or Mrs. Collins's." "You believe his disappearance is connected to the mask?" Holmes's expression was grim. "I believe we are witnessing the culmination of a plan set in motion long before our arrival, and I suspect our American friend, Dr. Reed, may be more deeply involved than he appears." Chapter 9. The Professor's Discovery. The search for Professor Morley assumed a frantic pace. Inspector Warren organized his constables and the household staff into search parties to comb the extensive grounds of Thornfield Hall, while Holmes insisted on personally examining the professor's room for clues to his disappearance. The chamber assigned to Morley was on the 2nd floor of the East Wing, a comfortable room with views of the formal gardens. The bed was disheveled, the sheets indeed stained with what appeared to be blood, though not in great quantity. "A minor wound, I would judge," Holmes remarked, examining the stains closely. "Consistent with a cut from a sharp instrument, not the hemorrhaging one would expect from a life-threatening injury." Holmes conducted his investigation with methodical precision, examining every item in the room. The professor's clothing remained in the wardrobe, his toiletries laid out neatly on the washstand. His academic papers were stacked on the writing desk, alongside several books on Byzantine history. He did not plan to leave, Holmes observed. And yet... He paused at the desk, lifting a leather-bound journal. This appears to be the professor's personal notebook. Let us see if it offers any insights. Holmes flipped through the pages rapidly, his keen eyes scanning the densely written text. Most interesting, he murmured. It seems our skeptical professor was more intrigued by the mask's alleged properties than he publicly admitted. Listen to this entry from 2 days ago. Examined the Opaline Mask extensively today. While I maintain strong reservations about its purported Byzantine origin, I cannot deny the craftsmanship is extraordinary. The opal exhibits unusual properties when exposed to various light sources, a phosphorescence that persists even after the light is removed. Most curious. S.W. observed me during my examination and seemed unusually anxious. Must investigate her interest further. S.W., I said. Sophia Winters? Precisely, Holmes confirmed, continuing to read. And this, from yesterday morning. Extraordinary discovery in the library last night. Found reference to a text called Theodora's Communion in a 12th century manuscript. The text describes a ritual using a mask of living stone to communicate with the Empress's deceased sister. The ritual required a specific preparation, essence of almond combined with powdered opal. The resulting compound supposedly renders the veil between worlds permeable. Scientific nonsense, of course, but the correlation with the mask's appearance is remarkable. I must examine the artifact again in controlled conditions. Holmes closed the journal, his expression grave. The professor was conducting his own investigation, Watson, and it appears he may have discovered something significant, something that placed him in danger. From whom? I asked. Miss Winters? Dr. Reed? That remains to be determined, Holmes replied. But this journal confirms the connection between the almond scent and the mask. It also suggests the professor's skepticism was wavering in the face of evidence. Our examination was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Baxter, Sir Frederick's secretary, looking pale and agitated. Mr. Holmes, you're needed immediately. One of the groundskeepers has found something in the old well house. We followed Baxter across the grounds to a small stone structure nearly hidden by overgrown shrubbery. Inspector Warren was already there, along with Sir Frederick and Lord Harrington. Professor Morley? Holmes asked sharply as we approached. Warren shook his head. No, sir. But we've found these. The inspector held up 2 items. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, unmistakably those of Professor Morley, and a fragment of paper with what appeared to be Greek lettering drawn in blood. Holmes examined both carefully. The glasses are certainly the professor's. The paper... He studied the bloody writing. A partial transcription of text describing the mask, similar to what we found in his journal. Written hastily and with blood rather than ink, suggesting he was desperate to record his discovery before... Before what? Sir Frederick demanded. That is what we must determine, Holmes replied, pocketing the paper. This well house, is it still in use? No, Lord Harrington answered. It was sealed up years ago after a child nearly drowned. The well itself was covered with stone slabs. Holmes knelt to examine the earthen floor of the small building. These stones have been disturbed recently, he observed, pointing to several large slabs propped against the wall. The well has been opened. The men gathered around the now exposed well, a dark circular opening in the floor. Holmes produced his electric torch and shone it down into the depths. The beam illuminated damp stone walls descending into darkness, the surface of the water visible perhaps 30 feet below. We need to send someone down to explore, Holmes announced. I'll have one of my men fetch ropes and a boatswain's chair, Inspector Warren offered. There's no time, Holmes replied grimly. If the professor is down there, every minute may be critical. To my alarm, Holmes began removing his jacket. Holmes, you cannot mean to descend yourself. The well walls have iron rungs embedded in them, he pointed out. Rusty, but likely still sturdy enough. I am the lightest and most agile among us, therefore the logical choice. Despite our protests, Holmes could not be dissuaded. With my revolver secured in his waistband and his electric torch between his teeth, he began the precarious descent. Those minutes of waiting were among the longest of my life. We could hear the occasional scrape of Holmes's shoes against the stone wall, and the dim glow of his torch grew fainter as he descended. Suddenly a sharp exclamation echoed up from the depths, followed by a splash. "Holmes!" I called down in alarm. After a moment's silence that felt eternal, his voice returned, somewhat muffled. "I'm quite all right, Watson. A rung gave way, but I'm safely in the water. It's only chest deep, and I've found something most remarkable." Several tense minutes passed before Holmes reappeared, climbing the iron rungs with careful precision despite being soaked to the skin. In one hand, he carried a sodden bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Once safely above ground, Holmes unwrapped his discovery on the floor of the well house. Inside the protective covering was a leather satchel, and within that, gleaming with unearthly luminescence even in the dim light, was the Opaline Mask. We stared in stunned silence at the artifact. It was smaller than I had imagined, sized to fit a woman's face, carved from a single piece of opal that shifted with colors of blue, green, and purple as the light struck it. The features were delicately rendered, serene yet somehow alive, with thin gold filigree accenting the edges and small rubies set where teardrops might fall. "The missing artifact," Sir Frederick breathed. "But how? Why?" "I believe Professor Morley discovered its hiding place and retrieved it," Holmes explained, still shivering slightly from his immersion. "The question is, was he the one who concealed it here in the first place, or did he merely uncover someone else's hiding spot?" "And where is Morley now?" Inspector Warren added. Holmes carefully rewrapped the mask. "That remains our most pressing concern. The professor's glasses and this message in blood suggest he met with foul play after recovering the mask. We must intensify our search, and I believe we should focus on the network of hidden passages we discovered earlier." As we made our way back to the house, Holmes walking slightly ahead with Sir Frederick and Inspector Warren, Lord Harrington fell into step beside me. "Remarkable man, your friend," he commented. "Though I confess, this business grows more confusing by the hour. A stolen mask that reappears, a missing professor, secret passages. One might almost believe the superstitious nonsense about the mask being cursed." "Holmes doesn't believe in curses," I assured him. "Nor do I," Harrington replied quickly. "Too quickly, perhaps, but you must admit, Dr. Watson, there's something unnatural about that mask. Did you notice how it seemed to glow from within?" Before I could respond, an urgent shout came from the direction of the house. We hurried forward to find one of the maids standing on the terrace, her face ashen. "It's Miss Winters, sir," she called to Sir Frederick. "She's collapsed in the library, and she's saying the most dreadful things." Chapter 10. The Mask Speaks. We hastened to the library where Miss Winters lay on a chaise longue, her face deathly pale save for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on the ceiling as she spoke rapidly, in what I recognized as the same ancient Greek that Holmes had been translating from her notebook. Dr. Reed knelt beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. He looked up as we entered, his usual composure noticeably strained. "She collapsed suddenly," he explained. "I was researching in the library when she entered, approached the Byzantine section, and simply fell. She's been speaking this way ever since." Holmes, still damp from his excursion into the well, set the wrapped mask on a table and moved to Miss Winters' side. He listened intently to her rapid speech, his brow furrowed in concentration. "She's reciting portions of the ritual described in her notebook," he said after a moment. "But there are variations, phrases I haven't seen before." He turned to Sir Frederick. Has she been moved since her collapse? No, Sir Frederick replied, clearly distressed. We thought it best not to disturb her until medical help arrives. Wise, Holmes agreed. Watson, your medical opinion? I examined her quickly. Pulse rapid but strong, breathing shallow, skin feverish. Similar to Mrs. Collins' state, though in this case the patient remains conscious, albeit in some form of trance. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, then his gaze sharpened on Miss Winter's throat. Her pendant, he said suddenly. It's glowing. Indeed, the opal fragment that hung from her neck emitted a faint luminescence similar to what we had observed in the mask itself. Holmes reached toward it cautiously. I wouldn't, Dr. Reed warned. In her current state, removing it might cause shock. Holmes withdrew his hand, studying Reed with newfound intensity. You seem quite knowledgeable about her condition, Dr. Reed. The American met his gaze steadily. I've spent years studying Byzantine artifacts and their associated rituals, Mr. Holmes. This phenomenon, while unusual, is not entirely unprecedented in historical records. Indeed? Holmes raised an eyebrow. I'd be most interested to hear of these precedents. But first, he turned back to Miss Winters, whose speech had suddenly shifted to English. It comes, she intoned in a voice unlike her normal tones, deeper, resonant with an accent I couldn't place. The veil thins. The vessel is prepared. Who are you? Holmes asked calmly, as if conversing with a normal person rather than someone in an apparent trance. Miss Winter's unseeing eyes turned toward him. I am the one who waits, the one who watches from beyond. Theodora knew my voice. A chill ran through the room. Sir Frederick made a small, distressed sound, while Lord Harrington muttered something that might have been a prayer. Holmes remained perfectly composed. And what do you want? A smile curved Miss Winter's lips, an expression wholly foreign to her face, combining ancient wisdom with cruel amusement. To return. The vessel was made for my journey. The bridge is nearly complete. The vessel, Holmes repeated. You mean the mask? My face in your world, she replied. Carved by those who understood the passages between realms. Forbidden knowledge, paid for in blood. As this extraordinary conversation continued, I noticed Dr. Reed edging toward the table where Holmes had placed the wrapped mask. His movements were subtle, casual, but his intent focus betrayed his interest. And Blake? Holmes asked. Did he attempt to use the mask improperly? Miss Winters, or whatever spoke through her, laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The arrogant one sought knowledge without offering the proper sacrifice. He spoke the words but did not understand their meaning. His life force was insufficient. And Professor Morley? Did he make the same mistake? Her expression shifted to one of contempt. The doubter? He sought to prove me false. He discovered the truth too late. Where is he now? Holmes pressed. Where all must go eventually. The path is one way for those unprepared. Her gaze suddenly fixed on Reed, who had now moved within arm's reach of the wrapped mask. The collector understands. He has studied the old ways. He knows what is required. All eyes turned to Reed, who straightened, abandoning his attempt at subtlety. I've spent my life researching the mask's powers, he admitted. When I learned Sir Frederick had acquired it, I arranged to be here. The mask is not merely an artifact. It's a doorway. A doorway to what, precisely? Holmes asked, his tone deceptively mild. To knowledge, to power. Reed's eyes gleamed with fervor. The ancients understood truths we've forgotten. The mask allows communication with entities that exist beyond our realm, beings of pure intellect who can impart wisdom beyond mortal understanding. At what cost? Holmes inquired. Blake's life? Morley's? Mrs. Collins's sanity? Reed shook his head impatiently. Casualties of ignorance. They approached the ritual without proper preparation. Blake was impulsive. Morley skeptical. The mask requires belief, respect, and yes, sacrifice. Blood sacrifice, Holmes stated flatly. The stains on Morley's sheets. Your own cut fingers, poorly concealed. Reed glanced down at his bandaged fingertips with surprise. You notice everything, don't you, Mr. Holmes? Yes, the ritual requires a blood offering. Symbolic only, a few drops freely given. Blake attempted to command rather than commune. Morley sought to expose what he saw as fraud. Their intentions were rejected. Throughout this exchange, Miss Winters remained in her trance-like state, her pendant pulsing with light that seemed to intensify as Reed spoke. Suddenly, she sat upright, her movements stiff and unnatural. The time approaches, she announced in that same resonant voice. The veil grows thin. I require my face. Reed moved decisively toward the wrapped mask, but Holmes was faster. He snatched up the bundle and stepped back. I think not, Dr. Reed. This communion ends now. Reed's face hardened. You don't understand what's at stake, Holmes. Knowledge that could transform humanity. Wisdom from beyond our limited perceptions. At the cost of how many lives? I interjected, moving to stand beside Holmes. Some prices are worth paying for advancement, Reed argued. Throughout history, progress has required sacrifice. Not on my watch, Inspector Warren declared, drawing his revolver. Step away from Mr. Holmes, sir. The tension in the library was palpable. Reed stood frozen, calculating his options, while Miss Winters began to convulse on the chaise, her pendant flaring with brilliant light. Watson, Holmes said urgently, we must separate Miss Winters from her pendant. It appears to be the conduit for whatever influence has overtaken her. I moved toward the young woman, but Reed suddenly lunged at Holmes, attempting to seize the mask. They grappled briefly before Lord Harrington and Inspector Warren restrained the American. As I reached Miss Winters, her eyes rolled back, and she spoke one final sentence in that unnatural voice. What was begun cannot be undone. I have waited centuries. I can wait longer. Then with a gasp, she went limp. The glow from her pendant faded, leaving only an ordinary opal against her pale skin. Holmes unwrapped the mask carefully, examining it in the light. Most remarkable, he murmured. The internal structure appears to be shifting, reforming itself. Indeed, before our astonished eyes, the delicate gold filigree within the translucent opal seemed to move like living tendrils, creating new patterns that pulsed with inner light. It's responding to proximity, Reed said, now restrained but still, watching the mask with hungry fascination. The connection remains, even without a proper vessel. It senses potential. Holmes rewrapped the mask decisively. Inspector Warren, I believe we have sufficient evidence to detain Dr. Reed on suspicion of involvement in Professor Morley's disappearance. Meanwhile, Sir Frederick, I suggest Miss Winters be moved to her room and attended by a physician. And this, he hefted the wrapped mask, requires secure storage until we determine exactly what we're dealing with. As the inspector led Reed away, the American called back over his shoulder. You cannot simply lock it away, Holmes. The mask has awakened. It will find another vessel if it must. What has begun cannot be undone. His words lingered in the air, long after he was gone, leaving us to wonder if we had indeed witnessed something beyond rational explanation, or merely the power of suggestion and shared delusion. Chapter 11. The chamber below night had fallen once more over Thornfield Hall, bringing with it a sense of foreboding that seemed to permeate the ancient walls. Miss Winters had been moved to her chamber, where she remained in a deep sleep under the watchful eye of the local physician. Mrs. Collins, too, was unchanged, neither worsening nor improving. Dr. Reed had been taken to the village police station by Inspector Warren, who promised to return with additional officers to conduct a thorough search for Professor Morley. Holmes and I retired to our rooms to review what we had learned. The recovered opaline mask sat wrapped in its oilcloth on the table between us, an innocent-looking bundle belying its apparent influence over recent events. "What are we dealing with, Holmes?" I asked, unable to keep a note of unease from my voice. "Surely you don't believe in supernatural entities speaking through ancient artifacts?" Holmes was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose of deep thought. "I believe in observation and deduction, Watson. I have observed phenomena that defy conventional explanation. A glowing opal, moving filigree, a woman speaking in a voice and language not her own." "But surely there must be a rational explanation," I insisted. "Indeed," Holmes nodded. "And I believe I am approaching one. However, it requires us to expand our conception of what constitutes rational. The properties of opal are not fully understood by modern science. Its molecular structure contains water, making it potentially reactive to certain chemicals and energies." He reached for Miss Winter's notebook, which he had kept in his possession since our midnight encounter. "These rituals describe the use of specific compounds that, when combined with the unique properties of the mask, create effects that might appear supernatural to the uninitiated." "You're suggesting some form of chemical reaction?" I asked skeptically. "Combined with powerful suggestion, yes. Consider. The mask is beautiful, ancient, surrounded by legend. Those who believe in its powers approach it with heightened emotional states: fear, reverence, desire. The chemical compound Reed mentioned, essence of bitter almonds, contains hydrogen cyanide in small amounts. Exposure could produce hallucinations, altered states of consciousness. That could explain Blake's death and Mrs. Collins's condition," I agreed. "But Miss Winter's transformation, the glowing pendant, the moving filigree in the mask itself," Holmes frowned. "Those aspects remain problematic for a purely chemical explanation." He unwrapped the mask carefully, holding it up, to examine it in the gaslight. "The craftsmanship is indeed extraordinary. The opal appears to be a single piece, yet the gold filigree seems embedded within it, a technical feat that should be impossible given the fragility of opal." As he turned the mask, catching the light at different angles, I observed again the strange, shifting quality of the stone, colors flowing like liquid beneath its surface, the gold patterns appearing to reconfigure themselves subtly as we watched. "There is one possibility we haven't yet explored fully," Holmes said suddenly, placing the mask down and reaching for a map of Thornfield Hall that Sir Frederick had provided. "The hidden passages we discovered suggest the house contains secrets, beyond what is commonly known. The collection room was originally a chapel, and beneath many old chapels, crypts," I finished, understanding dawning. "You believe there's a chamber beneath the collection room?" "It would explain much," Holmes nodded. "The trapdoor in the ceiling allowed access from above, but what if there's also access from below? It could explain how the mask disappeared. From a locked room. It never left, merely moved vertically rather than horizontally." Holmes rose abruptly. "We must examine the collection room again, Watson. Bring your revolver." We made our way through the now familiar corridors, Holmes carrying the wrapped mask. The house was quiet, most of its occupants having retired for the night. As we approached the collection room, Holmes stopped suddenly, raising a cautionary hand. "The door is ajar," he whispered. "I distinctly recall Sir Frederick locking it after our last visit." Drawing my revolver, I followed Holmes as he pushed the door open quietly. The collection room was dimly lit by moonlight streaming through the leaded windows. At first glance, it appeared empty, until a soft sound from the far corner drew our attention. Lord Harrington stood before the empty pedestal, his back to us, muttering under his breath. "Lord Harrington," Holmes called softly. "What brings you here at this hour?" The nobleman started violently, turning to face us with wide, frightened eyes. "Holmes, I was just, that is to say, checking the security arrangements. After today's events, you understand?" Holmes stepped forward, the wrapped mask still in his hands. "An admirable concern, though curious given that you have no official responsibility for the collection." Harrington's gaze fixed on the bundle Holmes carried. "Is that the mask?" "Yes," Holmes confirmed. "Retrieved from the well where it was hidden. By Professor Morley, we believe, shortly before his disappearance. Though why he would conceal it, there remains a mystery. To protect it, perhaps," Harrington suggested, his composure returning. "Or to protect others from it." "A thoughtful observation," Holmes remarked. "You seem to take the mask's alleged powers quite seriously." Harrington shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not a superstitious man, Mr. Holmes, but after what we witnessed with Miss Winters, there are more things in heaven and earth, as Shakespeare would have it." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, placing the wrapped mask on a nearby display case. "Tell me, Lord Harrington, have you ever observed anything unusual in this room? Drafts, unexplained. Noises, areas where the floor sounds different underfoot?" The question seemed to catch Harrington off guard. "I can't say that I have. Why do you ask?" "A theory I'm developing," Holmes replied, moving systematically around the room, tapping the marble floor with his walking stick. "Watson, please, examine the eastern wall, the one without windows." As I moved to comply, Harrington edged closer to where Holmes had left the mask. I kept him in my peripheral vision while examining the wall as directed. "Holmes," I called after a moment, "there appears to be a decorative panel here that doesn't match the others." Holmes joined me, running his fingers along the ornate carving. "Byzantine design," he noted. "Incongruous with the Tudor architecture." As Holmes examined the panel, I noticed Harrington making a subtle movement toward the mask. "Sir," I said sharply, turning to face him fully. "Please step away from that display case." Harrington froze, then smiled apologetically. "Forgive me, Doctor. Curiosity merely. After all we've heard about the mask, I simply wish to observe it more closely." Holmes, meanwhile, had discovered something in the carved panel. "There's a mechanism here," he announced. "A concealed latch of some kind." With a soft click, the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. A cold draft carried the unmistakable scent of damp earth and something else. The bitter almond odor we had detected before. "As I suspected," Holmes said with satisfaction. "A hidden chamber beneath the chapel. Watson, your torch, if you please." I handed him my electric torch, keeping my revolver ready. Holmes shone the light down the staircase, revealing ancient stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. "I believe," Holmes said quietly, "we are about to discover where Professor Morley went, and perhaps the true secret of the Opaline Mask." He turned to Lord Harrington. "Will you accompany us, my lord? Or would you prefer to remain here?" Harrington hesitated, clearly torn between fear and fascination. I believe I should inform Sir Frederick of this discovery." "A wise decision," Holmes agreed. "Though I must insist you leave the mask undisturbed in our absence." As Harrington departed, presumably to find Sir Frederick, Holmes leaned close to whisper in my ear. "Be alert, Watson. Our noble friend knows more than he admits, and his interest in the mask is not merely academic." "You suspect him of involvement in the theft?" I asked, surprised. "I suspect everyone," Holmes replied grimly. "Now, shall we discover what lies below?" With that, Holmes began to descend the ancient staircase, the beam of the electric torch illuminating our way into the unknown depths beneath Thornfield Hall. Chapter 12. Beneath the Veil. "He's dead, Holmes," I said grimly. "No pulse, no respiration. Rigor mortis suggests he's been dead for approximately 12 hours. Holmes knelt beside me, examining the body with his usual clinical detachment. "No visible wounds," he observed. "Similar to Blake's case. But look here, residue on his fingertips. The same powder we found elsewhere." The bitter almond compound, I confirmed. Cyanide poisoning could explain the apparent lack of trauma. Yet why come down here at all? Holmes mused, surveying the chamber. And after retrieving the mask from the well, why not simply report his discovery? As Holmes continued his examination of the professor's body, I explored the chamber, careful not to disturb anything that might prove evidential. The altar at the center drew my attention. It was carved from a single block of marble, its surface stained with what appeared to be ancient blood stains. Carved into its face was a mask-shaped depression, precisely the dimensions of the Opaline Mask. Holmes, I called. I believe this altar was designed specifically for the mask. Holmes joined me, his keen eyes taking in every detail. Indeed, and observe these channels carved into the surface. They would direct blood from the top of the altar to this central depression. Miss Winter's notebook mentioned blood sacrifice as part of the ritual. A sudden noise at the doorway made us both turn sharply. Sir Frederick stood there, his face ashen in the strange light, with Lord Harrington just behind him. "My God, sir," Frederick breathed, taking in the hidden chamber. "I had no idea this existed beneath my home." "An oversight many generations in the making," Holmes replied, watching our visitors carefully. "Lord Harrington found you quickly." "I was in my study," Sir Frederick explained, stepping cautiously into the chamber. "Is that Professor Morley dead?" "I'm afraid so," I confirmed. "Similar circumstances to Blake, though we'll need a proper autopsy to confirm the cause." Sir Frederick seemed genuinely shocked. "This is monstrous. First Blake, then Mrs. Collins, now Morley. What connection does this chamber have to the mask?" "I believe this was the true purpose of the original chapel," Holmes explained, pacing the chamber as he often did when assembling his thoughts. "Not Christian worship, but something far older, a cult centered around the mask and its supposed powers." "Impossible," Sir Frederick protested. "My family has owned this estate since the 16th century. We would have known." "Would you?" Holmes challenged. "The entrance was concealed. The knowledge passed selectively through generations. Perhaps not through the main family line." Lord Harrington had remained suspiciously silent, lingering near the doorway. Holmes turned to him suddenly. "You've been remarkably quiet, Lord Harrington." "Nothing to contribute to our discovery?" the nobleman started. "I'm simply overwhelmed, Holmes, as shocked as Frederick." "Are you?" Holmes asked skeptically. "Your hands suggest otherwise. They're quite steady, unlike Sir Frederick's, which tremble with genuine surprise. And you've been careful to keep your right hand in your pocket since entering." With a speed that belied his age, Holmes crossed to Harrington and seized his wrist, pulling his hand from his pocket. Clutched in it was a small glass vial containing a yellowish powder. "The compound," Holmes declared. "Essence of bitter almonds mixed with crushed opal. The same substance that killed Blake and Morley and rendered Mrs. Collins catatonic." Harrington's aristocratic composure crumbled. "You understand nothing," he hissed. "The mask's power is real. I've seen it demonstrated across generations. Your family," Holmes said with sudden insight. "Not the Ashtons, but the Harringtons have maintained this secret." "For centuries," Harrington acknowledged, abandoning pretense. "My ancestors brought the mask to England during the Crusades, established this chamber. The Ashtons were merely convenient neighbors, unwitting custodians of the land above." "And Reed?" I asked. "How does he fit into this?" "A true believer who discovered references to the mask in obscure texts," Harrington explained. "He approached me months ago, seeking access. I recognized his usefulness, an American with resources and obsession equal to the task. He helped locate the mask in Istanbul, convinced Sir Frederick to purchase it. While you maintained the appearance of casual interest," Holmes noted. "Then Blake became too curious, discovered this chamber." "He was unworthy," Harrington snapped. "A mere cataloger who stumbled upon power he couldn't comprehend." He attempted the communion ritual without proper bloodline or preparation. Sir Frederick stared at his neighbor in horror. "Edgar, what are you saying? You killed Blake? Your family has maintained some sort of pagan cult beneath my home for generations?" "Not pagan," Harrington corrected sharply. "Something far older. The mask contains knowledge from beyond, wisdom that has guided select families throughout history. The Byzantines merely formalized what ancient cultures knew before them." As this extraordinary confession unfolded, I noticed Holmes subtly positioning himself between Harrington and the altar, where I had placed the wrapped mask during our examination. "And Morley?" Holmes pressed. "He found the mask in the well. Brought it here?" "He intercepted Reed hiding it," Harrington confirmed. "Followed him, retrieved it later. I found him here, attempting to document everything for his precious British museum. He would have exposed centuries of carefully guarded knowledge." "So you poisoned him with the same compound that killed Blake," Holmes concluded. "The unworthy die. The worthy transcend," Harrington intoned, as if reciting liturgy. "Now, Mr. Holmes, the mask. It must be returned to its rightful place." "I think not," Holmes replied calmly. "Whatever power you believe this artifact possesses, it has cost too many lives already." Harrington's expression hardened. "You've seen the evidence yourself, Holmes. The mask's properties defy conventional explanation. Even your rational mind must acknowledge something extraordinary exists here." "I acknowledge exceptional craftsmanship and clever chemistry," Holmes countered. "The glowing opal, the moving filigree, impressive metallurgical and chemical effects, enhanced by suggestion and ritualistic conditioning. You still deny the truth when it stands before you?" Harrington laughed bitterly. "Then perhaps a demonstration is required." With surprising agility, he lunged past Holmes toward the altar. I raised my revolver but hesitated to fire, a split-second delay that Harrington exploited. He seized the wrapped mask, tore away its covering, and placed it into the carved depression on the altar's surface. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The mask settled into its ancient resting place with a soft click, and the entire chamber blazed with intensified light. The opal fragments in the mosaic walls pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat. "Behold," Harrington cried triumphantly. "The communion begins." He withdrew a small dagger from within his jacket and sliced his palm, allowing blood to drip onto the mask. The opal seemed to absorb the crimson droplets, its surface rippling like water. Holmes acted decisively. He threw himself forward, tackling Harrington away from the altar. I rushed to assist, struggling to restrain the surprisingly strong nobleman. "Watson, the mask!" Holmes shouted as we grappled with Harrington. I turned toward the altar but froze at what I saw. The mask was changing, the opal flowing like liquid, the gold filigree rearranging itself into new patterns. The face depicted was no longer serene, but animated, the lips parting as if to speak. Centuries of scientific education battled with the evidence before my eyes. Whatever explanation might exist, the immediate danger was clear. I seized the mask from the altar, half expecting it to burn or resist, but it was merely cold stone in my hands. The moment. It left the altar. The pulsing light in the chamber dimmed. Harrington howled in rage, redoubling his efforts to break free, but Holmes had him securely pinned. "It's over, Harrington," Holmes declared. "Your secret chamber is exposed. Your cult ended. You'll answer for Morley's death and Blake's." As Sir Frederick helped us secure Harrington with improvised bonds, I carefully rewrapped the mask, trying to ignore how it seemed to shift within the cloth. "What will you do with it?" Sir Frederick asked quietly. Holmes regarded the wrapped bundle thoughtfully. "It requires study under controlled conditions. Not destruction, knowledge should never be destroyed, but careful scientific examination, away from superstition and ritual." As we led our prisoner up the ancient staircase, leaving the hidden chamber to its centuries-old silence, I could not help but wonder if Holmes's rational explanation truly accounted for all we had witnessed. The mask's mysteries were not fully resolved, but its deadly influence on Thornfield Hall had been ended. Whether ancient wisdom, clever deception, or something between worlds, the case of the Opaline Mask would remain one of the most extraordinary in Sherlock Holmes's illustrious career.